Episode number 47, Gillian Gallow.
All right, cut to edge of stage. Great. All right, color frost.
Check. 1, 2, 3. Check.
Stand by, please. House to half, house out, lighting cues 1 through 10, sound cues 1 through 10.
Welcome back to The Title Block, a podcast about Canadian theatre designers, their history, and their craft. I am, as usual, your host, Michael Cruz, and this time I have an interview with set and costume designer Gillian Gallow. Now, it seems like a year ago now. Actually, it was a year ago now. This is how I record these things. That Gillian and I spoke about her early career at, yes, the Blyth Festival and the Stratford Festival. Surprising, at the beginning of what has become a very successful career. You know, I will be interviewing people outside of Ontario, I swear to God. But this is just what's convenient right now at my time in life, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy this interview with Gillian. She's a remarkable designer and has a lot of interesting things to say about her early career and her life in the theatre. Our conversation took place back in July of 2017 at my former home in Toronto. To support this and future conversations with fascinating theatre designers, please consider supporting us at patreon.com. Now, in the meantime, I'll keep it very short and sweet, so please enjoy this interview with designer Gillian Gallow.
From her start as the Carps PA at Blyth Festival in the early 2000s, Gillian Gallow has risen to be a A-list designer in Canada, designing across the country for the last close to 15 years now. And now she joins me on the Title Block. Welcome to the Title Block.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. And thank you for coming to my home. This is very convenient for me rather than running around to everywhere else to do these interviews. You started in Blyth, but how did do you want to take me through that story? Because you had just begun at York University when you were the PA at the Blyth Festival,
Yes.
correct? So how did you get to the Blyth Festival? First of all, where'd you grow up?
Okay, I grew up mostly in Oakville, Ontario. I was a small child in Houston, Texas, but we'll ignore that part of my history. And I grew up in Oakville. I went to high school that had a very strong drama program, particularly with the Sears Drama Festival, and just had an interest. And so I had a teacher who actually recognized design, which was unusual. So we had to do a maquette for a show, and I did a design. And
That's crazy, a maquette in high school.
Yeah, that was a project that you actually had to build a maquette.
That's fantastic.
So that combined with actually having a drafting program as well, like I just had this kind of foundation. I actually applied as a designer to theater schools, which is unusual. So I think at York, most people are applying as a performer. So I applied as a design student and decided to go there because I wanted kind of a broader education. And I was at York, and as York does, York goes on strike.
Right.
So I was in a production class, and theater never stops, doesn't matter if there's a strike. We held production classes, and they announced that there was a theater in Oakville, the Oakville Center, was looking for an assistant stage manager or a stage manager or something, some volunteer. And I despise stage managing. It's not my interest, but I thought, okay, I'm going to do this because I live in Oakville. It's where my family is. And it's just an opportunity. So I'm just going to do it on this kind of break from school. And I met Jennifer Jansen. Right. And Jennifer Jansen said to me, I think you would do really well at Blyth. Why don't you apply? I was still I think it was my second year, so I had very little knowledge of what Blyth was or the history of Blyth. So I applied, and I got this strange phone call saying, can you use power tools? And I lied, and I said yes. And I got this job as the production assistant carpenter, and that's kind of the beginning of all the relationships that have kind of formed my career.
That's incredible. Jen Jansen, of course, was the stage manager. I think she was the production stage manager there for a couple of years.
She might have been, yeah, but she was definitely around there, and a big part of the reason I got the job because she recommended. She said, "Yes, this person is capable."
Right. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And who hired you?
I'm trying to remember. Well, the TD, Doug Morum and Dave Surratt.
Oh, right.
were the people there. So I'm not sure if it was Doug that spoke to me or if it was Dave. I can't remember. But
can you use power tools? Sounds like a Doug question.
yeah.
So I think that is probably appropriate. Okay, that's awesome. And so you end up in Blyth.
Yes.
So you grew up in Oakville, and Blyth is this little teeny town.
It was. Yeah.
Blyth is a famous theme. It's a theme on the podcast as well. I've talked to lots of people, probably because I went there. I was there for like 7 or 9 seasons, so I enjoy Blyth. What was your first experience when you got there? Like, what was your impression of the place? And tell us what you worked on.
Well, the impression was interesting. I think I went to visit with my mother to see just what Blyth was, and discovering that, like, I don't even think there was a bank machine then. Obviously was not a liquor store, the small grocery store. But I remember my first night there. I was staying, I was billeting in a house, I believe, and I hadn't planned that it was a holiday, and I didn't bring any food. Right. So all I had was a loaf of banana bread that my mother had made me, and that's all I ate. For the whole day was this like one loaf of banana bread.
That's a classic Blyth story, because everything was closed. That's great. So that was your visit. There was nothing open. Now that the whole place has changed now in the last 15 years, it's quite incredible.
It has remarkably changed. I mean, the liquor store was the beginning, that you could buy liquor in the grocery store, and then it's unrecognizable now. And
then when did you actually start? What year was this? 2000?
I think it was 2002. I think I have struggled to remember, but it was definitely the first year that the Donnelly series that Paul Thompson did happened, because that is the first project I worked on there, which was huge.
It's quite your introduction to theater. It's outdoors.
It was collective.
Yes. It was very non-traditional.
And it was all over the town. Right. So not only was it outdoors, but you got to go into all these strange buildings that you would never get to go into in this small town. It was pretty unique experience, and it kept me going back. I mean, I did all 3 years. Right. So yeah,
that's incredible. And then you returned to, the strike was over. Did they come back in the fall when you were at York?
Oh, I don't remember. It was a really long strike. It was over Christmas that the strike happened. And I remember, we were just waiting. It was in the fall, and we were just waiting to find out if we were going to come back right before Christmas, and they finally canceled it. So I think in the new year we ended up starting again, but it was a really long strike.
Yeah. That's not unusual up there.
I know.
Did you work with Joe Henning at the Oakville Center? Was he around?
Not that I know of. He might have been, but I really had a brief role on that show. Right. And my main interaction was with Jen. Yeah.
She's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So you get through, what was your experience at York like after the strike came back? Like it's a mix of a studio and an academic program. What shows? Do you remember the shows you worked on?
I worked on a variety of shows, from anything from the sound tech to carpenter to, you get put on whatever crew they deem. And then in your final year, you can design. And I did design a show that I'm now blanking on the name of. I did the costumes for it. And that was a strange circumstance, because I actually hadn't pursued costume design in New York. I was much more set design, and they always encourage you, said you have to do 2 designs at least, you'll never get a job. So I peripherally did costume design, and then I got the costume design in my final year, but I wasn't taking 4th year costume design, which apparently is not allowed. Oh. So you have to do both. And so I had to end up doing that as an independent study to get that credit. It was very confusing, but it was an interesting kind of circumstance that pushed me into costume design that I suppose has helped me, because I've done a lot of costume design now. Yeah. A lot more than I do just set design. I do a lot more just costume design. So
many of the costume designers I talk to tend to have a sort of a long love of clothes right from an early age. So being thrust into that without having any notion of really wanting to seems a bit different. But what's your relationship with, did you find it was easy to adapt that 3-dimensional thinking to to the human body, as opposed to designing for the stage?
I suppose I always feel like I still struggle with costume design in some ways. I don't enjoy sewing or the creation of costume. I always joke with my mom that I paid $50,000 to learn how to sew because she always knew how to sew, wanted to teach me when I was a kid, and I could not care less. And I went to university and I had to learn how to sew. So it's not something that I feel at home with, in that I could produce costumes myself, whereas I do actually feel at home building objects, things, structures. So what I find, how I relate to costume, is I actually really enjoy people, and that's why I do a lot of theater. I love anthropology. I took anthropology classes in university. So I find myself more interested in the study of people and our relationship to clothes than actually fashion or anything like that. I'm not on into the fashion scene that heavily. So.
And why should you have to be? I mean, a lot of the stuff is you do contemporary work, but there's a lot of period work as well, and interpretive work in theater, so you don't really have to be.
No, and I don't think that a lot of shows relate heavily to fashion. They relate to people and everyday circumstances and real life, and I do find that interesting. As I've gotten, there's a myriad of shows, of course, that you do, and your mind opens up to all different aspects of clothing. So I have gained a stronger interest in it, but it was always a little bit alien to me, that clothing as something fun.
Excellent. And so you come out of York. They finally let you graduate after the strike and everything.
Yeah.
And
I think there were 2 strikes actually while I was there.
God.
Yeah.
I
think in my 4th year there was a strike.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
If only they treated their workers better, eh?
I know.
I'm sure they had a strike a couple of years ago.
Yes,
now as well. My goodness. So you come out of York, and you're obviously focused on being a designer.
Mm-hmm.
Did you start designing right away? How did you transition into the professional world?
It actually happened a lot while I was at school. So it all began with Blyth. So thank God I went to Blyth. And this is actually something I always tell people that I work with. Because you meet a lot of people in theater that are doing another job but are wanting to design. And so I was doing that. I was a carpenter. I met Victoria Wallace, who designed the Donnellys, and I told her, I said, I'm actually studying to be a designer. That's what I want to do. I'm just here. And she was the first one to hire me as an assistant because she said, well, if you can make it big, I'm sure you can make small things. So she let me do model work in her house, like assisting her while she worked in her house. And she would just give me a model piece to do, and she would pay me by piece rather than by hour, so I could take as long as I needed to make it. And that was a great first experience. Then as the Donnellys went on, I think in the 3rd year, I became the assistant designer on it. So Victoria didn't actually even have to come. I was just there to see it through. So that was kind of my first beginnings of design. But I also met people. So while I was in Blyth, I met Christopher Morris, who is my partner, and he is older and was in the theater world. And so through him, I also met theater people, one of them being Lorenzo Savouini, so I met Lorenzo through Christopher. Lorenzo was a designer, spoke to him, and he said, why don't you come to Stratford while you're still in school, talk to the heads of the design coordination there, figure out what you need to do to assist here. So I went in, showed my portfolio, and they said, XYZ, this is how you could become an assistant here and come back when you're done school. Right. So I did, and they gave me a job.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that in a profession that is all about telling stories about relationships, it's also based on relationships. Like, this is how everyone gets their work. It's very rare that people interview. Like, I think I did one interview in my entire career for a job, and most of it is word of mouth, right?
It's all. I am convinced that I'm horrible at interviews because I think the Stratford interview is the only time I've actually been interviewed and received a job. Yeah. Every other interview I've done, I have never received the job. Right. So every job I've gotten was because of relationships, or someone has seen my work, or whatever the connection is. It's not a cold interview, right? Ever.
Yeah, exactly. Now, were you? So you were assisting at Stratford right out of school. How was getting into that machine? Like, that was, again, totally different than any other place that works. Certainly not Blyth, although they do share a rep
Yes.
kind of philosophy, which is interesting. But how was your experience at Stratford? Like, what was your first show you worked on, and how did you find working in the machine down there?
I was very fortunate in my kind of transition into Stratford because I was straight out of school. I suspect they gave me a smaller show because of that, to learn the system. They also paired me with Peter Hartwell, who was someone who knows Stratford and who had been there before. So we worked on Orpheus Descending, directed by Miles Potter. It was at the Tom Patterson, and it was an amazing experience. It was so great. Not only did I learn a ton from Peter, but from all the artists at Stratford, to just see people actually making shoes, making hats. And this straight out of school was kind of mind-blowing. And you also, you have to recognize what it is that Stratford is a unique place, because then, the shows that I was doing on my own, I was like in my house trying to make all the props and make all the costumes. So you have those two things happening at once, which are quite interesting to see the diversity of how work is created. So that first show was a fantastic show to work on. And then my second year, I also worked with Peter Hartwell. So I had like another relationship that was already established. And in terms of the machine, I didn't feel the machine. Right. And I think that was of great benefit because I did feel it in my third and fourth season a little bit more. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I just interviewed Peter Hartwell about a month ago.
I'm thrilled to hear that.
Yeah, we had a really interesting conversation. Half of the conversation was it'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks, but this will be which for people listening on the podcast is about the middle of near the end of June. But he had half of his career took place in England, so there's a whole lot of people that we don't know over here. Mm-hmm. It was a really interesting conversation, but he's a really down to earth guy and a great person to assist, I imagine. Like he's very meticulous in his expectations of model building, and he does his own drafting, so that wasn't a part of it. And I did set and costumes. They now separate them, I believe, as assistants, but at that time I was just Peter's assistant. Right. And I think I prefer that method, but I know that for the system there, what they do now works. His experience with costume is not as strong, or his confidence in his costume design. I would disagree that his costumes aren't strong, that he says those things. But his confidence with it. So he's very collaborative and open when he works with cutters and when he works with actors, because he feels that he needs their input. And I think I learned from that openness. Yeah, I imagine that those first few years where you're assisting, you're kind of generating your own process as well. Mm-hmm. Especially coming out of university, you have a process. You know what the process should be, but you haven't really developed your own work, right?
Yeah.
So, and how about working with Peter? Any other designers you worked with at Stratford as well?
I worked with Philip Clarkson on The Merchant of Venice, and then the following year it was Des McAnuff's first show, which was Romeo and Juliet. So he brought in American designers. Paul Tazwell and Heidi Ettinger did the Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, and that was my last season.
How did you find working with the Americans compared to Canadians?
Well, the set designer was not around very much at all, and that was fine. It was difficult communication-wise. It was difficult in trying to understand what someone wants when they're not there to see it. That was challenging, and. But Paul is brilliant to work with. He also, as much as he wanted to be there, was too busy. And he fully admitted, he said, I couldn't take this contract, didn't want to take this, didn't want to, but was not available to take this contract. But Des really wanted him to do it. So they made all these accommodations for him, and he would fly in for 2 days and not. What was really difficult was I was doing fittings and having to, send photos with all the questions of the fittings, and fittings would take a day because of the time it took to get the answers. Right. So they ended up getting me an assistant to assist because of the scope of the show was just so much, and the demands out of rehearsal were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we had tons of blood. It was Romeo and Juliet, and you're like, why is there so much blood? It was a really. It was an exhausting process. I did learn, I did enjoy working with Paul, and I did learn from him as much as I could. But it did wear me down as an assistant, and that's why I did not go back.
It was the show that broke you. Yeah.
It kind of was.
Yeah, it sounds like an associate position more than anything else, which is not a position that's usually at Stratford. Right?
No, it's not often there. I mean, the year before, I actually ended up being the associate set designer because the set designer quit on the first day of rehearsal. But then once this thing happened on Romeo and Juliet, like it wasn't ever going to be that I was the associate. Actually, there was an American assistant who I think got the title of associate, and she basically shopped for fabric in the States and sent it. And I don't know the politic of how all that was decided, but it was a little crazy. And in retrospect, a very good experience. Right. And I was already kind of ready to be done with Stratford going in, knowing that the 4th season was probably going to be my last. And then the exhaustion of that year was it.
That's incredible. I just want to touch on Christina Podibiak. You assisted her on Mary's Wedding at the NAC in 2002. That was part of your...
I just built a model for her.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's all I did. And it was great because I was actually working in Blyth at the time, so I built it in Blyth, and she was around Stratford, I think. Anyway, so that was it. And I wish I would have assisted Christina on costume design at some point in my career. I still would assist Christina Podibiak on costume design, but that's what that was. Yeah.
Yeah. I interviewed a couple of years ago. She was great to talk to. Well, that's excellent. Now, how about again, Lorenzo, whom people have already heard me listen to or talk to. He spoke about the sort of changing atmosphere of assisting at Stratford, where it used to be much more of a legacy, where you would assist people there, you would sort of work up in the machine, and then eventually you would work through the process, and then eventually you would come back to design there. Now you have come back to design at Stratford.
Yes.
Has that been independent of that process? Like how was that working in the early 2000s?
Well, I can tell you, it wasn't associated with Stratford at all. It was all due to the generosity of Miles Potter. Right. So Miles was the director on the first 2 shows I assisted on. I had a great time working with him, assisting him. It was just, I wasn't assisting him, I was assisting Peter. But anyway, he was directing. It was fantastic. And what happened, this is going back to how badly I do at interviews. I had been asked to design a show, but the artistic director didn't know who I was. So he asked me to come in for an interview. So this director wanted to hire me. And I sat down in an office with the artistic director, and through the interview process, it kind of came out that I hadn't worked at very many large theaters. I think Thousand Islands Playhouse was the biggest show I had done, which is a small theater. It's a summer theater, different scale. And this is a theater in Toronto. So basically came out of it, said no to the director, saying she doesn't have enough experience. And so I went to Stratford and I told Miles this story. Right. I just, he said, well, how did the interview go? And I said, well, this is what happened. I don't have enough experience. And I don't know if it was a week later or 2 weeks later or what it was, but he came to me and he said, how would you like to design costumes for The Graduate at the Grand Theatre in London, Ontario? And what he had done, without my knowledge, was he had gone to Andrea, the production manager there, said, how do designers start? Like, how do they get enough experience? And she basically said, someone has to take a chance. Someone has to be willing to just try and see. And so that was Miles's generosity, that he just said, you know what, I think you can do it. And to be honest, it was terrifying. Like, not only was it a large theater, the Grand Theatre, but Sonia Smits was playing Mrs. Robinson. So there you have, someone who has celebrity. And so I had to have, pre-phone calls about costume design with her to make sure that the costume design was okay, the color choices were okay with her and stuff like that, which was a new experience for me as a designer. It wasn't something I had really known about doing. So Miles took that chance, and Miles had continued, like throughout my career, Miles has been a reason I have ended up in multiple places. And he's the reason I worked at Stratford. He's the only director I've worked with there. And he has continually made the effort to bring me into new theaters, expose me to new people. And yeah.
That's excellent. That's an uncommon theme in designers as well. They tend to follow directors around. So that's great.
Yes.
How was working with Miles? Can you tell us about that relationship and how he works and how you find that enjoyable? And
Miles, we all know that every director is very different. And with Miles, particularly in terms of clothes, I find him fairly hands-off. He loves seeing what you produce, but he doesn't necessarily come to you saying this is what it has to be. So you share, he looks at all the images, he looks at all the fabric, says something, we comment, we explore, but it's, we talk a lot more about the play itself. Well, I can always ask him about character. He totally knows how to talk about character. He's actor driven in a lot of those ways. And that's what you need as a costume designer. You don't need someone to say what t-shirt you should go buy, right? That's actually not usually that helpful. So he's great in that way. And then I always joke with Miles that if he gives me a costume note, once we've done dress rehearsal, it must be really bad. Right. Because he usually doesn't, the best part is if he doesn't notice it. Right. Because that means it's not a costume, it's seamlessly is clothing. Right. Depending on the show, but I remember, particular shows like Awake and Sing, where it's 1920s, 30s America. It should be fairly ordinary clothing. And so I remember he noticed a plaid shirt and he hated the plaid shirt. And I was like, okay, we will change that plaid shirt. Because if he noticed it, that's not good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And how did The Graduate go? Tell us about your experience and what do you remember much about the show?
I do. I remember a lot about the process, and this is revealing of kind of my, I guess, growth as a designer. I remember doing the drawings, and I absolutely love doing costume drawings. That's actually one part of costume design I love. But I was agonizing over these costume drawings. They were not good enough. They were never going to be good enough. They weren't good enough. And I was bawling my eyes out. And I remember thinking that, I can't do this job if this is going to be the process. It's too painful. It's, I'm putting too much of my own value in something that is a piece of paper that's probably going to change, that's probably not going to look like it was bizarre, the amount that I felt my worth was in these drawings. So I learned so much on that show in terms of just that part right there of releasing myself from feeling that was who I was as an artist, and allowing the process of theater and the process of creation to develop, so that by the time we got into the creation point, I didn't feel like I had to have all the answers. I think that's what it was, right? You do the drawing and you think you have to know everything. Right. Every element of it. And you know what? You discover a lot as you go and as you build and create and talk to cutters and talk to the actors and everything.
I think it's probably the greatest lesson that you cannot learn at university, that you probably, as a designer, everyone comes to is trusting the process and trusting your own ability to figure out those problems as they arise, rather than living with the ambiguity of, what if it all fails? Right?
Yes,
Learning to trust yourself and people is probably the biggest thing to learn as a designer. Right?
Yeah, and the great thing about theater is you're not alone. You're never creating these things alone, and you have all these people around you who, especially at that point in my career, had a lot more knowledge than I did. I was one of the cutters on the show was Joanna, who works in Stratford, and she's a miracle worker. Right. And so that right there answered so many of the questions about how this costume would look, what would be the right fabric, all that sort of stuff.
So so that went very well, though, The Graduate, because obviously you came back to the Grand Theatre many times after that. That was a great chance. Right?
Great, yeah. So this is kind of what's happened. Miles has brought me to a theater like the Grand, and then they have supported me. So I was able to do multiple shows there, work with a variety of different directors, and they really helped me. And some of the stuff I did wasn't great, and some of it was great. And but they allowed me that time and their resources to kind of explore very early design.
Right.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So you worked with Susan Furley, Michael Dobbin, Miles Potter, obviously, and then and of course Christopher Morris, whom you are partnered with.
Yes.
How do you find your professional relationship with Christopher? How do you guys, obviously, because you share an intimate relationship as well, you must have a really great shorthand.
We do
together,
now.
right?
Yeah, we do now.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of shows, and a lot of the work that he does as a director is not dissimilar to Paul Thompson's method of collective, but he's much more in will actually write a script as opposed to the collective, sometimes wild creation process. But he is all into international creations, building things over, multiple years, not just 3 years, sometimes 7 years. Like these projects take a long time. And he always includes design. Michelle Ramsey's been the lighting designer a lot, and she's been involved early on in the process. I've been involved, and it's just, it adds a deeper level. Like, I don't necessarily think all the workshops I have done with him have necessarily created a design, but it is a little bit of helping. There's a dramaturgy to it as well. Like there's, you discover the visual kind of world or themes or things that help support the story. But when it comes to the actually designing the show, once the script is ready, it's just in you. You know it, and what the story needs in order to be supported. But then Christopher himself is also a certain particular style of design director. And I remember for his show Night, there's it's very episodic. There's tons of references to things where you think you need a house, you need this, you need that. And he was like, I don't need anything. All we need is a radio, and we need a gun, and we need a box of bones. And, so he leaves it wide open in terms of how because he's written the script, he knows how he's going to direct the script. And that has developed, so his subsequent shows have also had a similar style in that there's not a lot of realism. And that it does give us a shorthand. We just enter the process that way. And it fits with my kind of leanings. I love installation art, and a lot of those shows relate to installation art. And it does help. I mean, our first show together was hard, though. Right. I don't want to say that it's perfect. Like when you're working with your partner, you have to not involve your relationship, right? So it's not about the personal part. And you also, what we learned on our very first show together, which was I Am Yours at Equity Showcase, which is one of my favorite shows because it was crazy. And, that's one thing where you're at home, I'm like sewing bed sheets together and my mom is helping me. My mom's a big part of early designing, right? She's always there, hands-on, helping me till midnight. So we did this show, I Am Yours. And what we learned was that we had to stop talking about the show at a certain point. Right. Like we couldn't go home and continue to talk about the show. Right. We had to actually have a life of our own that wasn't related to the show. And that was the biggest lesson we learned on that one. And we've been able to do that now when we work together. It's not all about the show all the time, which is very healthy.
Yes. Yes, I would expect that. That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the Grand Theatre is not the only place you've been to multiple times. Manitoba Theatre Centre. You've been to, was that another Miles Potter introduction?
It sure was.
Wow, that's crazy.
Thanks, Miles Potter.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
I've never worked at MTC. I have lots of friends, obviously, that have. And we haven't spoken to it a lot about it on the podcast, so I'm glad you're here to talk about it. What was your first experience there like? When did you first go?
I did God of Carnage there.
Right.
I don't remember the year.
I think I've got it here.
Yeah.
2012.
2012.
Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah.
So not that long ago, only 5 years ago.
Only 5 years ago.
So I did do costumes for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but I didn't. It was first done in theater at Theater Calgary, so I didn't go to Winnipeg when it happened. But Miles did hire me to do God of Carnage set and costumes at the main stage, which I remember being particularly funny because if you know God of Carnage, there are 4 people in it.
Oh yeah, I don't.
It's small. It's a living room show. It's one set. Right. 4 people. And then in the studio space, which is quite small at MTC, they were doing August Osage County. Oh, right. So it was the big joke about, what?
Yeah, why are you doing that? Yeah.
Why don't we flip these around? I know Brian Perchalek, who was designing that set, was a little like, why am I doing the big show on the small stage? Right. I think it was Brian. I hope it was Brian. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so that's the first show I did there. It was a brilliant experience. It's a great regional theater in terms of not only resources, they have a great shop and great people, but, I think the people are actually what make it great. So the props department is full of people who have so much experience. And I remember them offering things. So you're from a different city. You don't know a lot of things. You don't know the means of the theater. You don't know sometimes you don't know what you can ask for. Like, I've learned now, you just ask. But sometimes at times you don't know what the options are, and they would say, you know what, like, I think what you want is actually this, and I know where to get it. And so they would do things like that, which was brilliant. I just loved working there. I found it very supportive and a positive place. And I've been fortunate enough to go there, I think, every year since that show, or maybe missing one year, I don't know. But it's been a constant relationship that has been brilliant. It's kind of what happened with the Grand Theatre. They kept hiring me, and then I haven't worked at the Grand Theatre in a long time, and I'm still working at MTC. And, I know at some point there probably will come a time when they won't ask me. And so I'm just trying to appreciate this period where they are asking. Yeah,
that's a good position to be in, I think, or a good take on it, I think, because things are so variable.
They are. You don't know.
You can't count on much, right?
No.
Hi there. Yeah, I know this interview is going really well, but before you skip ahead, just shuffle over to the show notes if you could and click on the link to the Patreon page for the title block. It does cost money to produce this time capsule of theater design history, and for a couple of bucks an episode, you can ensure that I can continue to put out great interviews with designers like Gillian Gallow. Please go to patreon.com/thetitleBlockPodcast and donate now. Thank you for your help.
How was it returning to Stratford as a designer? How did you find that experience after you'd been an assistant? Especially only within probably 5 or 6 years of leaving, right?
Well, I think it was actually, I had no issues with it, or like there was no, I didn't feel a certain way about it necessarily. Like, I was thrilled to be there as a designer and to utilize the resources and everything. The weirdest thing is that I was never sure how well I did with the assistants there, having been an assistant. And from what I'm told, I was a very good assistant. But I never knew if I was very good at working, like being a designer to the assistant. Like, I wasn't sure if I gave them the right things or if they learned much. Sometimes I felt like I was maybe still too young for them to learn from or something like that. But I don't think that's necessarily true. There's always, I think if you're assisting someone, there's always something to learn. I feel like I could assist people now and learn things about their process and their choices, and just being, I think other people have alluded to this, that you never get to work with another costume designer. It's so rare. So that opportunity to just observe how someone deals with a costume is great. So that was always my one point of hesitation there, but I did love designing there, and I loved working with the cutters that are just so brilliant, in the props department and all that sort of stuff. It was a treat there. I loved it, and I think the first show I did there was it Three Musketeers, because it was huge. So I feel like there wasn't time to even think. Like the costume, they would put on a costume to run across the stage, and they put on a costume to run across the stage. I was happy that I just knew the system of Stratford, so I could navigate all the things that, if you're just walking in cold, trying to understand how to get something done can be difficult. Yeah. So I knew how that worked. So I feel like I had a leg up in that way.
Yeah, I get the sense that being an assistant at Stratford, you're very much a traffic cop. Yeah. Like, I need to go, I don't know, find some fabric. Okay, we'll go talk to so-and-so and so-and-so, and then we'll schedule it next week for a buying trip. And then, like, that seems to be a lot what you're doing.
It's interesting because there is that part of it. And then I don't know if it's changed, if it's become more, there's a formula now. But when I assisted there, I felt like we just went and did it. Right. Like with Peter and I would just, I think people were shocked. There was one time we went to Value Village and we spent like $1,000 at Value Village, but that's what Peter wanted to buy. So we just did that, and it didn't matter, and no one cared. And really, and similarly with fabric, we would just go and do it, as opposed to waiting to like formally do the proper trip that you're supposed to do. But I think they now kind of make you do that. Right. I think we were just we were also doing the small show. No one really cared. Right.
So I've talked about process a lot on the show, so we don't really have to go into specific processes. But where do you find your inspiration? Like, are you a research based designer, or do you deal with do you have your own kind of creative well that you draw from? How do you find your ideas?
I'm heavily research based. So I spend a lot of time just gathering images, and a ridiculous amount of time, and too late into the night most of the times, just finding images to work with, and a lot of them never come up again from the first time I look at them, and often even in the process I forget about them. But there's something that just looking at images helps me define what I think of the show, or what, because I like design to affect mood or feeling of an audience. I like it to impact their experience of the story. So it's that's why I like installation art, because although a lot of people feel it's a cold kind of form of art and kind of weird and interpretive and all that, I actually have an emotional response to a lot of installation art. And so I use all these images of whether it be installation art or actual other set designs sometimes, or lighting design, or a stormy day or something, whatever it is. They all kind of feed into what I consider like an emotional palette, and then kind of work from there to reinterpret that into the story that we're telling.
That's interesting you mentioned installation art. I remember having most of the good kind of gallery experiences I recall are all the immersive or non-traditional, like when you learn a lot about art history, interacting with a painting or a sculpture is very much predicated on what you know about it. But in installation, in these kind of three-dimensional space-filling installations, you really are kind of immersing yourself in it, right? Yeah. And that's what we do. That's our vocabulary in theater. It seems like that would be an obvious, like that would be the obvious way we interact with the art world would be through those kind of objects, right?
I agree. There was a show that I assisted Steve Lucas on. I think that was the first show I assisted him on, which was DNA Theater. Right. They did. I don't remember them. It wasn't it's not. I don't know if it's listed on there. Okay. But anyway, it was in a house. It was in Hiller's house. And you traveled through the rooms of the house, and they had designed each room. And I remember the first, I still remember this, and it was so long ago. And there's a lot of theater that I've seen that I don't remember. But this, you walked in, and the ground was real grass, and the room was painted white, and there were birds flying around. And then the next room you walked into was a kitchen with food cooking on the stove, but it was really dark and full of stuff and like knickknacks and things. Like you could spend so long. It looked like a meal had been eaten on the table, all that sort of stuff. And that experience was a theatrical experience because there was a story that was happening inside me as I traveled through. Yeah. And those sorts of things have impacted me so strongly. And that's what I love. And some of the fun things that I get to design are when the audience gets to do some sort of more immersive experience. Going inside something or creating a set that at least comes to them in a way that puts them somewhere else. Or
can you give me an example
of a design that's done that? Well, I mean, it wasn't a profound design, but the very first thing, I Am Yours at Equity Showcase. There's no theater there, so we created like a box out of bed sheets, and we made the box try to look like it was breathing, and we did all these things. And the audience had to go in. There was that one, and then this is similarly we created a box, but for the last show I did with Christopher, The Road to Paradise, inside Buddies, we created a box that had metal walls and sand or cork floor, and part of that experience was partially to not unsettle the audience, but to remind them that they're entering something, a different space. And we played the sounds of Pakistan that we had recorded when we were there. And, Richard Farron worked on that show. And those things are unique experiences in theater, I guess, that sometimes you have a stage to work with and sometimes you can create the stage. So that's it.
That's great. I remember we did Peep Show. Steve Lucas and I talked about this. at Buddy's, it was the same kind of thing where we had different installations. That reminds me a lot of that, actually. That's great. So let's talk about. We've got about 15 minutes left. So let's talk about. Do you want to mention anything about? Because we met first when you were assisting Steve building models for him. Do you want to talk about that relationship before we move on? Anything you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, it was just another great relationship in terms of learning. I built models and did a lot of drafting for Steve, so it was mostly studio work, and it's again just seeing the different ways people create and think. And Steve was always very generous and kind with ideas. And that first show, taking me to a meeting with a director about this, the DNA theater show, like it kind of, actually, no, I didn't work on, now I'm remembering. I worked on I Know and Feel That Love Is Something. It's a really epically long title.
Yes. Okay, well, just for the history books,
I
have it here. It is, I know and feel that fate is harsh, but I am so loath to accept this. Is that right?
That's the first show I did with Steve.
Right.
And I remember now, I went to see the DNA theater show because of that relationship, like that anyway, so we worked on this show. The fact that he took me to this meeting with this really out there kind of theater group that was creating in a totally different way and exposed me to this environment. I actually wish I had done more on that show. I feel like I had the opportunity and I was busy probably doing something else and I couldn't be there. But that generosity of Steve was great because he didn't really know me.
That's awesome. Great. Well, let's talk about, first of all, you've just done an octoroon.
Yes.
I've never said that out loud before. An octoroon at Shaw with Peter Hinton. And you just finished Lous Riel, which just opened at the NAC last week. It's the same show, obviously.
It was.
So let's talk about both of those things with Peter Hinton. Let's talk about an octoroon. Give us a bit of a synopsis, if you can. This is a Peter Hinton written show as well?
No, he's not written it.
Okay.
It is, so we're still working on it. It hasn't opened yet at the time of this interview. So Dion Boucicault wrote this play in the Shaw era time. And he was actually more famous than Shaw at the time, melodrama. But Brendan Jacob Jenkins, an American playwright, has taken this play and re-examined it in a way, in a modern, like with his own eyes, but he's basically using that story to tell another story. Right. And so they're enacting parts of The Octoroon, which is the original play, and he has written An Octoroon. So it's both modern and period, it's it's melodrama, it's totally outrageous, but it is extremely poignant in terms of our relationship with race and with each other and our history. And it's a fascinating project to work on. And I'm feel so privileged to be the one, because working with Peter is also a huge treat. He's a great director to work with. And so that's what we're working on right now.
And we're not, you're obviously in the middle of the process, so we don't want to give too much away, but where are you heading? What direction? You're doing both the set and costumes.
Yeah, I'm doing
right?
set and costume. Yeah. So the very start of the play, just to give a taste of how extreme it is, you don't need, the stage direction is what the writer tells you to do. There's not a lot more that you can do to push the boundaries. So he begins the play with what he says is a black playwright comes out, and he introduces himself as the black playwright, and then talks. You learn that he's going to put on this play, but he has to play all the white characters, so he puts on whiteface. And then Dion Boucicault, the character of Dion Boucicault, the playwright, is a white man who comes on, and as he did in history, he puts on redface to play the First Nations character in the show. And then he has, in Brendan Jacob Jenkins' version, he has an assistant who is a First Nations person who puts on blackface to play all the black men in the show. And then there are other people who are playing who they are. So, there are black actors and there's a white actor, and, there are other characters, and they are actually all women who play themselves without putting on white or blackface or redface. So that's just the beginning of the show. Yeah. So you can imagine how crazy it is. So you've got a modern person putting on this white face, getting into costume of a period. Right. So we see him actually get into costume. That right there sets up an interesting costume. You can do whatever you want, and we've accepted that it's a costume. And then they all play multiple roles within that. So he goes on and on, the layers of it. But essentially, it's an antebellum, 1859 setting. So with the costumes, we've chosen to go strongly in the period direction. So we're sticking with period. As I usually do, there's strong color choices in it. That's kind of something I enjoy playing with. And the set, though, is extremely minimal and, in a way, modern. So you're supposed to be at a plantation. You're supposed to be at a wharf. You're supposed to be back, like, inside the plantation. Then you have to be at a slave quarters. We don't have any of that scenery, but every act of the show transforms. The set transforms, but it's not in a realistic way. So we've used art by this artist named Kara Walker, who does a lot of silhouette art and comments on kind of Black history and culture in America, and that's her art, explores all that. So we've used her as an inspiration, and it's a really interesting combination of period and modern that's in the script. It's not imposed. We're not imposing it upon the script. Right. It's there. Yeah.
That's interesting. It's I find that one of the things that theater does a lot, at least that I mean, this is how I designed, is that I'm not an auteur, and I was not somebody who had these original ideas. I drew a lot from other artists and other disciplines, and that's something that theater does a lot. Like, there's a lot of plays that are based on the art of X, or during the production process, we found these three artists that we're basing our look on, which is not, I mean, it's derivative, but it's a reimagining, or it's an inspirational kind of position to be in. How do you find having those, opportunities? In this case, it's a restriction or a boundary that's set by the play. But how do you find being led down that path rather than being an original creator, as it were, or an original artist? Like, how do you manage that relationship?
Well, I guess that's what theater design is, like theater creation is. Unless you're going to write the play, you are, in a way, always given some sort of framework to work within. And to be honest, I love that. I love having the framework. I actually get squirmy when someone says to me, "Oh, it's set in no time," because I'm like, "What does that mean? I don't understand." So I like boundaries because I feel like it's the same as when you say, "Oh, it's great to have no budget because it makes you more creative." It's like a boundary that makes you decide something because you only have certain resources at your means. So similarly, whatever the play gives you are your, you could consider it boundaries, or you could consider it opportunities, right? So just different perspectives. Having said that, I would love, and it's something I always have on my list of things to do, is to actually take time to create something that is my own, which is, for me, mostly about painting or drawing or something like that, that is not structured. Like, what do I have to say as an artist without the framework of a play is something I'm always considering. And I think even as I get older, it gets stronger and stronger because you're always responding to the work that you're presented with. And you need to have opinions and attitudes about it and a perspective on the world. And so it makes you want to even more have a perspective on the world that is your own and to get it out there. Right. Yeah.
That's interesting. And so it sounds like an obvious prelude to an octoroon was Lous Riel in the setting of the Canada's 150 and the relationship with Indigenous people and Métis and everything else. Tell us about, in Canada, as it were, tell us about that process. How did Peter, have you worked with Peter before?
Yes, I've done King Lear was the first show I did with him at the NAC, which was the first all Aboriginal production of Shakespeare. So it was entirely cast with First Nations. And then I did Thirsty, which was in their studio space, a smaller show. And then there was a few years kind of break, and then I did Lous Riel. So
like that.
Yeah.
And so how was that process? How first of all, give us a synopsis of what it's an opera.
Yes.
So do you know the librettist and the composer? Like
Harry Summers is the composer.
Okay.
And Mavor Moore is the librettist. And there's a French contributor as well, which I don't remember the name of.
Okay.
Which I think because of the translation issues, and there's French singing as well as English singing.
I
and all
see.
that,
Okay.
you know.
Well, that'll be in the show notes for people
Yes.
to look at. And tell us about, it's a new opera.
It was written in the 60s.
Oh, I see. Okay,
So it was
great.
first performed for Canada's centennial. They were asked to write something for the centennial of Canada, and they chose Lous Riel. So right there, as Peter often commented, is that the fact that they chose Riel to celebrate Canada's centennial is pretty remarkable, because Riel is and has been, especially in the past, a very contentious part of our Canadian history as to how you view Riel and his actions. So but it had not. I think it had been produced in the 70s. Again, there was a show in Washington, but it's not really done. Right. This opera is not, one that opera singers pull out that they know this opera. So right there, it was difficult because the music is extremely difficult. Right. I don't know anything about it, but that's what they tell me. Okay. The music is really hard for them to learn and sing and all that sort of stuff. It's also, I actually did find it, I'll admit, I found it hard to listen to, because it doesn't just go into the background, like it assaults you at times. So I'd be working and I'm all, jarred by this Riel music. But we spent over a year working on the show with Peter from early meetings. And if anyone has worked with Peter, if you haven't, there are times you're meeting with him, it can be all day and you can never talk about design. Right. So you're talking about all the things in politics that have happened in the world right now, what's going on. I remember Black Lives Matter was going on in our early meetings, and that was a big focus of some meetings. And it's all about what he, in a beautiful way, and this happened on King Lear as well, he uses his designers in those meetings to help him develop his ideas, and he talks about a lot. And, there are times when I think, oh, he's got it all figured out. Why are we doing this? Right. But then I realize, no, he is figuring it out, and he is working through it all and developing ideas. And then you'll come to the next meeting and you realize, it's a week later and he's had, I don't know if he doesn't sleep or what, but he's been thinking and thinking and thinking and has all these new things to offer. And it's really inspiring, and I love that as a designer. I know there are some designers that find it too much. They just want to talk about the design, and I love it. And it's similar with Octoroon. I'm always learning from talking with him. But Riel began very early, and a lot of discussion around the issues with the original opera were that it didn't involve Métis or First Nations people. And at the time, it was a lot about French and English relations. And that's what was happening in the 60s. It was very present in everyone's minds. And Riel himself, is French. And then there's the English in Ottawa trying to kind of go across the country and create the railway. There's this kind of burgeoning capitalism that's happening and people wanting to produce and move. And so that's what it was about then. But today, you can't produce this opera in the same way. You just can't. So Peter focused so heavily on how to repair that part of the opera. Yeah.
That's interesting. And you're doing costumes on this, which is really interesting because you started off with, like at the beginning of your career, kind of reluctantly agreeing that, yes, I should do costumes as well. And here you are on a major Canadian work, designing only the costumes.
Yeah.
What was the direction you took, and how did you find your way there? And how, and maybe if you could put that in the context of how you changed your way you approach costume design in the last 15 years.
Okay. So I have to remember the first part of that question.
General shape and direction of the current.
So, with Peter, it's all about, you have these meetings, and I would just slowly build a bank of images. Right. So we would meet, and I would, as these ideas were coming and he was talking, even sometimes as he's talking, I'm like writing down the keywords, and I'm a big fan of just Googling keywords and the weird things that come up. Right. I love it. And so I would just come to meetings, sometimes with a bag full of paper that would never come out. And it was all images I'd found, and sometimes they would come out. And I would just lay them out all over the table, and Peter just hones in on certain things that resonate with him in the same way that they resonated with me. So that's kind of how the costume and the design developed. And what we ended up doing was really trying to, there's a whole, the opera is huge. The number of people in it are huge. There's like close to 30 soloists alone. Oh my God. In addition to, your chorus, which is 35 or 40. Peter added in a second chorus, which was the land assembly, we called them, which were all First Nations people, which ended up being close to around 20 people. And
this is not the type of show you can go like to Houston Opera and buy the chorus from their production of Lous Riel.
No. But what we ended up doing was this interplay between modern and period, and that was not out of necessity and budget. It was actually out of trying to understand this opera in our current context. So the chorus that sings became the parliamentary chorus of Canada today. So the people of Canada today, in terms of all different races, but all dressed in modern suits, and they're kind of commenting above and separated from the action. The land assembly were all First Nations people who were dressed in modern clothing and were the people that Lous Riel was fighting for, essentially. So they are the people today feeling the effects of this story. And that was very powerful in terms of seeing that Riel isn't one man fighting for himself. He's fighting for an entire group of people in the community. And it was a very diverse group of people: Métis, First Nations, Irish, French, goes on and on. So then we have them. Then we have Riel, his mother, his wife, all the people that supported him. And we decided to dress them in period clothing to represent the history of the time, the true circumstances. And then the kind of strange other group was all the, we have the politicians like Sir John A. Macdonald, Cartier. Then there's someone named Donald Smith who was kind of leading the commercial part, representing Hudson's Bay Company. He kind of went between Ottawa and Winnipeg, or what is now Winnipeg. Sir John A. Macdonald never went west. Then we have Bishop Taché, who also went between the two and was kind of sending information. I mean, you think about the time, the travel's not as easy as it is today. So we had that group of people, and that was, and it has been perhaps the most commented on part of the production, because we chose to, what we really wanted to do was separate them from the historical representation, not necessarily historical, but show the division between these two worlds, that you've got a people who are living on the land, fighting for their rights, and the other ones who are coming in to try to take over and govern. And one simple, and this is something that no one would know, but it was a really interesting fact that at the time they divided the land. People who lived in the Manitoba area divided the land so everyone got a piece of river with long strips. The English came in and divided it like a grid, which was very unfair because people couldn't access the river and all that sort of stuff. So this kind of idea of a grid and like lying things out became a strong image, and then we started to use it in the costumes of plaid and that sort of stuff. So we have Sir John A. in this red plaid suit, and that we tried to make kind of slick and fit to a current day aesthetic as opposed to a period aesthetic. Cartier was in that world as well. But there's also in the opera itself, the music used at that time, used in those sections is a bit, it doesn't present Sir John A. in what we'd like to think of as our colonial kind of founder. He is a little bit of I don't want to, it's not, buffoon is not the right word, but he's poked fun of in the opera in a lot of ways. And drinking is commented on and things like that. So we kind of ran with that and really tried to divide these two worlds. So
that's fantastic. Did Peter have any, besides the core, like the people in the cast, did he have any kind of Indigenous artists or people that he was working with to tell that story outside of that? Yeah,
so Estelle Shook, who was the assistant director, is Métis herself. Then Peter insisted on bringing in actors to play particular roles, and also to get any Indigenous singers, soloists involved as well. So Joanna Burt, who played Sarah Riel, is First Nations. But then he brought in Jenny Lauzon, who became kind of a key figure, this folk singer. He kind of changed the role of this person to be the leader. And she, I think, helped develop ideas. Same with our buffalo dancer, Justin Manyfingers. He did comment on things, and the choreographer for the buffalo dance is also First Nations. And so there was actually a moment. So I had an image of someone dressed in a frock coat, period costume, with a buffalo on their head, like a buffalo head. Right. And we loved this image. We were going to use it for the buffalo hunt. Showed it to Justin Manyfingers, who is a buffalo dancer. That's what he does. He's like, "Oh, that's really colonial. Like we don't do that. We don't stuff animal heads and put them on the wall." Like he really didn't like it, and so it was not in the show. And that's because that's not what the buffalo dance is about. And the original production, we wanted to get away from the fact that it didn't really properly use the buffalo dance in the context that it should have been used. So we were working on that, and that was an important collaborator, and we needed that input because we don't have that knowledge. So as great as that image is, it doesn't serve. And so we just tossed it.
Yeah, and that's an essential, I think, thing of theater design. Well, that's terrific. I just wanted to land, just as we end here, on your participation in the Obsidian Theater Company training program, because we spoke with Rachel Forbes, who people will have listened to already, about her experience, and really this opened her up to her career as a designer. And how was your, there's not a lot of, besides assisting at Stratford and Shaw or hustling your own kind of assistant positions, there's not a lot of formal apprenticeship programs in Canada, and this is, I guess, one of them. How was your experience working with young designers and prospective designers, and how do you feel? What do you feel is important for them to learn, and how did you bring that to that experience?
I love doing it, and I've every experience I've done with Obsidian's program has been very positive. And what's weird is that sometimes you never know how their experience was. They say it's great, but I don't know. And all I do when I have an assistant is try to be as open as possible to either answer their questions or just tell them things as I think of them, but involve them also in every aspect. So I remember the last Obsidian mentorship, Janelle St. Clair was assisting me, and we were building this model, and it was like tedious and really difficult. And I think it kind of drove her crazy. Right. Like she was going crazy. And the worst part of it was that we built we were building mini flats, and it was just over and over and over and over and over again. And then we decided to build the set in a different way, and we got cut. Those we're all cut. So I think that was a brutal, when I told her, just face dropped. I was like, yeah, so we're not using those anymore. Which I think is a great lesson of being able to not be precious with ideas or things that you've spent hours and hours and hours and hours on. The one thing that I've found I keep recently telling, because I have had a few assistants, I guess I didn't list on there, Tanya Grieve, the stage manager, works, what school is she at again? George Brown, is it?
She's at Humber, I think.
Humber,
Grieve,
yes. So she set me up with someone recently to also assist. So she came to my studio and we're talking, and, she brought up the fact that they're constantly told that you can't make a living as a designer. Right. And I don't like perpetuating that story. And the reason I don't like doing it, I understand that you want to give people a realistic perspective on the lifestyle you might lead and the choice that you've made. But I think it also sets up the belief that you don't deserve to be paid more. So if you tell people in school, you know what, you're never going to make money, you're going to be poor, just accept it. And sure, you weed out the people who don't want that life. Yeah. Great. But then you've got a group of people who are willing to be paid less than they deserve. Yeah. And I was very adamant to her that, you know what, you actually can get paid, and you can be paid decently. You're not going to, of course, be a millionaire from this job. Very rarely does that happen. But I think you can make a good living, and it is possible. It's not easy, and there are, of course, but that's the same with any job. Yeah. There are sacrifices and choices, and you just have to be aware of the choice you're making. But that is the one thing I try to say to people, that, you know what, don't accept being paid less because you think that's just the way it works.
And that is a great optimistic note to land on. A rare optimistic note at the end of the title block. Thank you very much, Gillian. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you.
That was designer Gillian Gallow speaking to me from Toronto in 2017. Next time, a special presentation of a conversation about the history of 1837, the Farmers' Revolt, recorded at Blyth, Ontario by a friend of the podcast, Beth Cates, this past week. After that, a conversation with Siobhan Sleeth. The music for this podcast is by Vern Good, with voiceover by Gabriel Cropley. Please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. It'll help get the word out about this podcast and share the history of theatre design in Canada. And you can follow us on Twitter at TheTitleBlockCA and on Facebook.com/TheTitleBlockPodcast. You can send comments and requests by email to TheTitleBlock@gmail.com. Now, don't forget that if you like the show, please support us on Patreon.com. Feel free to share this with your friends, colleagues, students, and teachers, or listen to it while you make an innumerable number of model 4x8 flats for a very complicated show, just to have them cut a week before the build. I'm Michael Cruz, and I'll see you next time on The Title Block.
You did The Red Priest. Where did
Recently,
you do the Red Priest?
At Alberta Theatre Projects.
Oh, terrific. Who was in it? Was Miyako Ochi in it as well? Or
No, she wasn't in it. Alison Lynch played the violin.
Yeah.
Jamie, I'm trying to remember her last name, Konchak, I believe, was the woman. And then we had a change of cast at the very last minute for the man.
Right.
So I'm struggling to remember his name.
Oh, that's okay.
Because it was so last minute. But it was the original. Ashley came
Ashley
came
did
back
it. Oh,
and
great.
did it. Yeah.
I did The Red Priest in Toronto.
Oh, interesting.
With Ashley and Ron Jenkins directed it. And Miyako was in the Toronto production because they had just done it in Alberta. Where was it? It was probably Alberta Theatre Projects that did ATP. I think did it originally.
They did, yes,
Yeah,
in the 90s, I think.
Yeah, right. So they did it there, and then it got brought to Toronto. That's where I first met Ron. And David Beckler did the set. I have pictures. I can show you pictures.